Year 5. I apologise for this being a little bit late. I've been quite a busy half term, so I do apologise for only uploading this now, but hopefully you'll all have access to it now. You can get on with the questions, and we can have a little bit of a practice on adding and subtraction fractions, which is what we're going to focus in our intervention session today. So before we begin, I wanted to run through these little fraction rules for you, okay? Because I think some of you are getting a little bit confused about what you need to do when you're looking at each fraction, okay? You forget which bit you need to do when. So whenever you're working with fractions, okay, whatever the question is, I don't care. Whenever you're working with fractions, this is what you must always do so you can calculate your answer. So the first step is make sure that our fractions are both either improper fractions or mixed numbers. Okay, so you need to make sure in your question, you've got a question, you need to make sure that they're either improper fractions or mixed numbers. They're all the same. Okay, so your improper fractions are your fractions where your numerator is bigger than your denominator, and your mixed numbers when you've got a whole number and then a fraction next to it. Okay, so you need to make sure in your question they are all the same. Okay, so you've got to convert them so they're the same. If you need practice on converting these fractions, use the video that I've already done in the intervention section already. Okay, use that to help you if you need a little bit of more support on that. And then the second step, once you've got all your questions, all your fractions in your question the same, so they're all improper or they're all mixed numbers, you then need to make sure that your denominators are the same. Okay, so your number on the bottoms, your numbers on the bottom of your fraction always have to be the same. And then once you've done those two things in any of your fractions questions, you can do anything with them. Add them, take them away, times them, divide them, whatever. Okay, so that is these two steps you just always have to follow. But don't worry if you're still a little bit confused, we're going to run through it now, okay, to help you. So here we go, add subtract fractions. Let's run through these questions. So the first one then, we've got 2/8, add 4/8. So let's look at our steps. So our first one says make sure that our fractions are both either improper or mixed numbers. So we look at our first one, okay, and they are both the same. We can see that they're both just standard fractions, 2/8 and 4/8, okay. So none of them are improper, none of them are mixed numbers, but they are both in the same. They're not different. Okay, next step we need to look at is to make sure our denominators are the same, and we can clearly see that our denominators are both 8, they're both the same. So we've done those steps, and now we can do anything with them. So what we've got to do then is add them together. We've got 2/8 and 4/8. Of course, when we're adding, we always, once we've got our denominators the same, our fractions the same, we then focus on our numerators, the number on the top. So we do 2/8 and 4/8, which is obviously 6/8. Okay, you're just focusing on your numerators, the number on the top. Right, looking at the next question then, we'll do exactly the same thing. So make sure our fractions are both either improper or mixed numbers. Okay, we've done that. They're both in the same format. They're both just standard fractions. Step 2, make sure that our denominators are the same. Okay, they're not. So that's what we need to do first of all. Make sure our denominators are the same. So how are we going to do that? Let's run through our first bit then. So here it is, exactly the same question. 1/4 plus 5/8. And what we need to do, we need to make sure our denominators are the same. And when we do this, it's easier really to make it the same as the bigger denominator. So the bigger denominator is obviously 8. So I'm going to convert my 1/4 into 8. Now I've done this loads, guys. So what we have to do then, we need to make them the same. So whatever we do to our denominator, how do we get from 4 to 8? Okay, of course, we multiply it by 2. Remember, we don't add, we don't subtract, we just multiply. Okay, so we've gone 4 to 2, and whatever you do to your denominator, you must do to your numerator. So we're also going to multiply that by 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. So what we've done now, going back to this question, is we converted our 1/4 into 2/8. It's exactly the same. And then look, we've done our 2 steps. So we've got our first step is to make them the same. Okay, we've done that, and we've made our denominators the same now. Okay, the 2/8 and 5/8, and then we can do whatever to them, add our numerators, 7/8. It's as simple as that, guys. So as long as you're following these rules every time, okay, so you make sure that they're all improper fractions or mixed numbers, and then you're making sure your denominator is the same, you can then add them together. Okay, it makes it really easy. Just follow these 2 rules every single time. Same with the next one. Okay, so our fractions are the same, but look, our denominators are different. So we've got 5/6 and 1/3. Or take away 1/3, sorry. So again, what I'm going to do, I'm going to focus on the bigger denominator, which is 6, and convert my third to 6. So whatever I do to my denominator, so how do I get from 3 to 6? Times it by 2. Again, whatever I do to my denominator, I also do to my numerator. Exactly the same thing. So 1 times 2 is 2. So I've got 2/6. I can go back to this question. Change that then to 2/6. And then we've done it now. Our fractions are the same, denominators are the same, so we can just focus on our numerators. 5 take away 2 is 3. So we've got 3/6 as our answer. Okay, and the final question then on there was this one here. So we've got 1/3 add 1/4 add 4/12. Now, don't be scared, guys, if you're seeing three fractions, okay? You are going to do exactly the same thing you've done before, okay? You're just doing it twice, okay? So, for example, let's ignore 1/4. Let's pretend it's not even there on your question page at the moment. We're going to ignore it. So all we're doing is we're adding 1/3 add 4/12. So again, focus on your bigger denominator, which is 12. So you can convert your 1/3 to 12. So how do you get from 3 to 12? Remember, we don't add, so we multiply. How do we get from 3? What do we need to multiply 3 by to get to 12? You multiply it by 4. And whatever you do to your denominator, you do to your numerator. So you do 1 times by 4, exactly the same. And 1 times 4 is obviously 4. So we can now go back to this question. We can change our 1/3 into 4/12. Okay, now we can't carry on yet because remember, if we go back to our rules on here, all our denominators need to be the same. We haven't quite got there yet. Okay, this denominator is still 4. So now we focus on this denominator. How do I get from 4 to 12? Okay, of course, I multiply 4 by 3, and I do exactly the same to my numerator. So I'll multiply that by 3, and I get 3. So I've got 3/12. So again, back to the question. I've converted my 1/4 now to 3/12. And then I can add them all up, guys, okay? Our denominators are all the same. They're all in the same format. Now I can just focus on my numerators and add them together. We've got 4 add 3, which is 7. Add the other 4. 7 add 4 is 11. So our answer then, 11/12. And it's as simple as that. So don't get scared when you see more numbers, guys. You're doing exactly the same thing, just might take you a little bit longer. It's no harder. It's just a little bit longer because you've got that extra step in place, okay? And it's as simple as that. So whenever we're working with fractions, guys, whenever you're worried about adding or subtracting fractions, okay, make sure that they're all improper or all mixed numbers, they're all in that same format. You haven't got a mix of both. And make sure the denominators are all the same, and then you can add them or subtract them or whatever the question asks you to do. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this bit, and I think this is where people began to get a little bit confused. So it's basically what we're doing with our fractions. We do exactly the same thing again, follow the rules, and then sometimes there are these extra steps involved. So it might ask you to convert your answer back to a mixed number, or it might ask you to simplify a fraction. We're going to run through those scenarios now. So let's focus again on the first one. So we'll do exactly the same thing again, guys, exactly the same thing. So we've got 3/5 and 4/5. So then let's have a look at a rule. Make sure that our fractions are both improper or mixed numbers. Okay, perfect. They're both the same format. They're both just standard fractions. And the second point was make sure our denominators are the same. So this has a denominator of 5, and this has a denominator of 5. So easy. Now we can do whatever we want with them. Okay, so 3/5 and 4/5, we focus on denominators, and our answer then is, of course, 7/5. Okay, now what it might then ask you to do next, once you've worked out your answer, it might ask you to convert it back to a mixed number. So at the moment, we've got an improper fraction here because our numerator, our number on the top, is bigger than our denominator, the number on the bottom. And we want to convert this then to a mixed number. Now, if you're confused on how to do this, I'll run through it quickly with you now. But if you're still a bit confused, there is a video on the interventions page on the Google Classroom showing how to convert your fractions. So if you are struggling with this, use that video instead of this one. But I'll quickly run through this now anyway. So we've got 7/5. So what is this as a whole, as a mixed number? So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's one whole. 6, 7. Okay, so I've got my 7/5 here. I've drawn them out. So you can clearly see I've got one whole here. I've got 2 left over. I've got 2 out of a possible 5. So I've got 1 and 2/5. Okay, so now I've completed this question. The first one, I've added them together and got 7/5, just following the steps that we did before. And then my extra step was to convert them back to a mixed number, which is exactly what I've done. And there's your answer, 1 and 2/5, done, complete. Okay, so you're just following the same steps every single time, like we've done before. These 2 steps, like we did on all these questions, we're doing exactly the same thing again. And then there's just that extra step that sometimes it asks you to do. Okay, so converting it back to a mixed number. We'll have a go exactly the same as the next one then. So we've got 5/8 at 3/4, and then I want you to convert it back to a mixed number. So we'll follow the same steps again. So are they both in the same format? Yes, they're both in those standard fractions. Have they both got the same denominator? No. Okay, this has got a denominator 8, this is a denominator of 4, so we'll do the same thing again. So here's our question, 5/8 at 3/4. So we're going to convert then our 3/4 so it has the same denominator. So how do I get from 4 to 8? Of course, I multiply it by 2. So I do exactly the same thing to the top. So I've got 3 times 2, which equals 6. Okay, simple as that. And then I've converted then my 3/4 to my 6/8. Denominators are now the same, so I can add up my fractions. So 5 add 6, of course, is 11. So my answer is 11/8. And it's as simple as that. But then remember, the question asked me to convert it back to a mixed number. So I've got my 11/8 here, and I'm going to convert that then back to a mixed number so I can draw it out or try and work it out in my head. If you're still confused on this, use the other video like I mentioned before. So I will eventually get the answer then as 1 whole, 1 lot of 8. And I've got 3 that are left over. So I've got 3 out of a possible 8. So that's my final answer. I've just converted my improper fraction, which is this here, to a mixed number, just because that's what the question asked me to do. It's as simple as that, okay? So if you're struggling with that, guys, don't worry too much. Use the other video like I mentioned before that's on your interventions topic on your Google Classroom, okay? It's just as simple as that. You're doing exactly the same things you've done before throughout this whole intervention session, and then you're just converting them, okay? It's as simple as that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at then is we're going to look at this time simplifying your fractions as that extra step. So we'll have a look at this third question here. So we've got 1/6 and 2/6, and we're going to do exactly the same as we've done before, guys. So are our fractions in the same format? Yes, they are. Are our denominators the same? Yes, they are. They're both the denominator of 6. We've done that bit, and now we just need to add them together. Got 1/6, add 2/6 then. We can see if we work that out. 1/6 and 2/6 is obviously then 3/6. Okay, nice and simple. But what the question then asks you to do is you want to simplify your fraction. Now, what we mean by simplifying a fraction is making our denominator smaller. So it's just simpler. So instead of saying 3/6, you'd say whatever it is that you're simplifying it to. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So we'll have a look at our 3/6 and we're going to simplify this. So what you've got to do to simplify it, you've got to find a common denominator, okay? So what you've got to do, you've got to see which number goes into 3 and goes into 6, okay? So what number is divisible by, what number can go into both 3 and 6? So you start from 1 and you count upwards. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Now, you don't include 1 because obviously 1 goes into all the numbers. If you divide them both by 1, they'll get the same answer. So does 2 go into 3? No. Does 3 go into 3? Of course it does. Does 3 go into 3? Does 3 go into 6? Yes, it does. Okay. So what you've got to do then to simplify your fraction is you divide it by that common denominator. So we've worked out our common denominator is 3 because it goes into both 3 and 6. Okay. And what you've got to do then is you divide both the top and bottom by a common denominator. So I'm going to divide that by 3, and I'm going to divide this by 3 because that is my common denominator. So 6 divided by 3, how many 3's go into 6? Okay, so 3, 6, that's 2. How many 3's go into 3? Obviously 1. Okay, and that's it. 1/2. We've simplified this 3/6 here. We made it easier by saying it's 1/2. Instead, it's simplified, it's simple. So we go back to the question, 3/6, and we can also put another equals there of 1/2 because we simplified that even more. They are all exactly the same. 3/6 and 1/2 exactly the same. You would get a tick for this, but if you wanted to simplify it, or if the question asked you to simplify it, then this is what you need to do. Find a common denominator, divide both your numerator and denominator by this common denominator, and work out what your simplified form is. Okay, so the next question then we'll look at exactly the same here, 1/12 and 1/4. We're going to do the same thing again. So again, what we did before, we need to make sure that our fractions are both either improper or mixed numbers, which they are. They're both in the same format. Next step, we need to check if our denominators are the same. Okay, of course, the denominators are not the same. So we've had loads of practice of this. We're going to convert our quarter into 12. How do we get from 4 to 12? Multiply it by 3. And you do exactly the same to your numerator. Multiply it by 3. So we've got 3/12. Simple as that. We've converted our 1/4 to 3/12. And then we can add them together. Okay? And we end up then with 4/12. Okay, but remember what I want to do now, what we're going to practice doing is simplifying our fractions. So we've got 4/12 and we want to simplify it. So what number goes both into 4 and goes into 12? So, okay, 2 does. So you could simplify it by 2. 3 doesn't go into 4. 4 goes into 4 and goes into 12. Okay, so the bigger that number you're simplifying it by, the better. Okay, so 2 goes into this, but you can simplify it by dividing it by 4 instead. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'll divide my denominator by 4. So how many 4s go into 12? 4, 8, 12, that's 3. And whatever you do to your denominator, you do to your numerator. So we'll divide that by 4 as well, because that's 1. So there you go. That's your answer. Okay, so 4/12. You would have got a big tip for that, but instead we've converted it, we've simplified it, so it's the same as 1/3. Okay, so you've simplified it. Your numerator is 1. That's really what you're looking to try and do. If you can make your numerator at 1, that's the simplest form it will go into. Okay, and then finally then, we've got our last question, which is 3/5 and 9/10. So we'll do exactly the same thing again. Our fractions are in the same format, so we're happy with that. We don't need to do any converting. Our denominators, though, are different. So same again. How do I get from 5 to 10? I multiply that by 2. And I'll do exactly the same to my numerator. I'll times that by 2. I've got 6/10. So now I've converted my 3/5, 6/10. So we've been through this loads, and then we add them together. So the denominator stays the same, and we just add our numerators. 6 and 9, 15. Okay, and we're done. We could just leave it there as an improper fraction, but what we want to do instead, we want to convert this down, so we're simplifying it. Okay, so what we could do first of all, we see this as an improper fraction. We want this then as a mixed number first of all. That is part of the simplifying process. If you've got your answer as an improper fraction and you convert it to a mixed number, that is simplifying it as well. So that's the first thing we're going to start with. So I'm going to convert my 15/10 into a mixed number. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 1 whole, 10 dots. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's another. So I've got 5 then left over. So I've got 1 whole, which is here, and 5 out of the possible 10 left over. Remember, if you're struggling with your converting, guys, use the other video on the Google Classroom page for me. Okay, so you've got 1 whole and 5 tenths. Okay, so I've now converted that to a mixed number. But what I can do is then simplify it even further. So you're going to leave the 1 on its own and you're going to focus on the 5/10 and convert it, simplifying your 5/10. So I'm going to write that here. What numbers then go both into 5 and 10? Have a little think, count up from 1. Okay, and eventually you'll work out that obviously 5 goes into 5 and 5 goes into 10. So we'll divide both by 5 then. And you get 2. How many 5s in 10 is 2? And how many 5s in 5 is obviously 1. So it's 1/2 again. So what we go, if we go back to our question, we've got 15/10, which is exactly the same as 1 whole and 5/10, which is then exactly the same as 1 whole and 1/2. Okay, so I've just simplified it. So I've got the answer 15/10. That would have given me a tip, but now I've simplified it into 1/2. It's a lot simpler to say 1/2 and 15/10. Okay, so don't worry if you're a bit confused by that, guys. It's not that bad. You're following the same steps every time. Okay, so remember, start off with these 2 points. So make sure that they're all in the same format. They're all either normal fractions, improper fractions, or mixed numbers. They're all the same. Make sure your denominator is the same, and then you can do anything you like with them. Add them together, follow what the question said, subtract them, etc. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Use this video then to help you with your questions that are also attached with this video on the Google Classroom site. Use this video to help you if you're struggling. If you're still struggling, don't worry, we'll talk about it in our intervention session next week. Okay, thank you very much, Year 5. Enjoy the rest of your holidays. I apologise again for this being a little bit late, and I'll see you all on Monday. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week.